We're very proud to present Ewald Engelen, who's going to speak for us tonight. He's an esteemed financial geographer at the UvA, and he has several, he writes for several newspapers and magazines as well. And tonight he's going to talk to us about what's wrong with the university, what's wrong with financialization, and what's wrong with the political system. So probably very definite answers if I know his work well enough. And so let's give him a hand, Ewald Engelen.
Thank you very much for the invitation to come and talk here. This must be one of the most inspiring places in Western Europe at the moment. So it's a great honor to be invited to come and give a talk about the issues which I think the occupation of the Maagdenhuis, and before that the occupation and the occupiers of the Bungehuis are actually addressing. I don't know to what extent you actually know what you're doing, so I will try to indicate by way of three parts about the issues, the larger issues, which I think are addressed by the occupiers of both Bungehuis and Maagdenhuis. I don't know why I got this sort of big hit mark here on the place of my heart. If anyone wants to shoot, this is the place to do it. But let's try to keep it as friendly as possible. And up until now, it has been very friendly. My talk is improvised, so bear with me if, for whatever reason, I can't immediately find the word that I'm looking for. Bear with me if my sentences don't end where they're supposed to be ending, but this is all part and parcel of improvisation. Talk is going to consist, as I indicated, of three parts. First part is going to discuss the question briefly, what is wrong with the university? I'm going to do that briefly because I'm sort of fully aware that you are, just as I, very much aware of what is actually wrong with the university. So I'm simply going to give you my take on it, and I do it as quickly as possible. Second part might be a little bit more complicated and deals with what's wrong with financialization, and that immediately suggests that what I think is so very constructive about what you're doing here in this particular place, in this particular conjuncture, is that you're actually addressing the perversities of the increasing financialization of society and the different spheres of society. So I'm going to say a little bit more about that. And then finally, I'm going to talk about, and this is also an issue that is near to the heart of the occupiers of both Maagdenhuis and the Bungehuis, namely what is wrong with our current political system. Something is actually awfully wrong if you look at the way in which elites are responding to legitimate requirements and legitimate requests by the people they're supposed to take care for. And that will be my sort of final part, and then we can have some sort of a Q&A for the remaining 20 minutes. Again, this is improvisation, so I've basically got not the faintest idea how long it's going to take, but I can assure you it's not going to be as long as any speech by Castro or Derrida, for that matter. Not that I want to compare myself, of course, with these two illuminated speakers. What's wrong with the university? It's basically a tragic story about what has gone wrong, in particular with the University of Amsterdam, but with a lot of other universities in the Netherlands. When this became known, and when this actually became as large as it has currently become, I increasingly received emails from students as well as staff from other universities in the Netherlands, which basically indicate that they're in the same sort of mess. Board of directors of universities who have over the last 10 to 15 years transformed themselves into real estate developers and have basically given up on the primary process of universities, namely education and research. They don't know what researchers and teachers, let alone students, look like, what they smell like, what they taste like, etc., etc. The only people that they actually meet are other directors of other universities, functionaries from ministries, bankers, of course, real estate developers, and people from the large building corporations in the Netherlands, as well as, of course, all their international contacts, which are mainly located in the Ivy League universities in the United States and the United Kingdom. These are the people that they talk to and against which they measure their own sorts of activities. This dates back from 1995. It's quite crucial that we're able to pinpoint the exact date when this train wreck in slow motion actually started happening. 1995, 3 years after the Treaty of Maastricht was signed, most potential Eurozone member states had an obligation to bring their state debt below the threshold of 60% of GDP. And that basically meant that all potential member states did their utmost to outsource or put future financial obligations off balance. So what happened in the Netherlands is that the future financial obligations related to social housing were outsourced, hence the privatization of building corporations. The same happened with all sorts of utilitarian real estate. Universities, hospitals, large secondary school groups, etc., etc. Suddenly, from one day to the next, they became the owner of quite expensive real estate, which they simultaneously had to renovate, keep up with, etc., etc. And of course that entailed huge financial obligations. The next phase in this whole story is that increasingly the University of Amsterdam had to make the management of their own real estate more efficient. So they came up with a real estate plan. The real estate plan is now in action. It's being realized. And it actually results in these 4 big spots in the city where different faculties are going to be located, and it's mainly done through new real estate. The first spot was, of course, the Science Park in the southern part or the eastern part of Amsterdam. The second spot is currently under development and is the Routers Eiland complex where the social sciences are being located. The third spot is going to be the humanities spot here at the Oude Maagdenhuis Poort, and the fourth spot is the Academic Medical Center in the southeast of Amsterdam. In order to do that, the University of Amsterdam had to borrow hugely. I have not a clear recollection of what the actual amounts of debt of the Dutch university is. There is a figure in a paper that I wrote together with 2 colleagues, but of course that needs to be updated because the overall indebtedness has increased since the last time that we looked, and it's approximately something like 500 million euros. And it's the first time in the long history of the University of Amsterdam that they have actually taken on debt, and especially, of course, taken on debt to such a huge extent. In a response to a report in the Parool, the University of Amsterdam indicated that they had only taken out loans with a fixed interest rate, which is basically bullshit, because they've also taken out 250 million approximately in credit derivative swaps, which you only take out if you have loans with a variable interest rate. The whole response of the University of Amsterdam to that particular report in the Parool was basically bullshit. So a lot of loans, a lot of credit derivatives, and once you have to communicate with bankers, once you've got to communicate with the developers of Ballas Nedam, a publicly quoted corporation, or BAM, another building corporation, also publicly quoted, you need to have in-house expertise in order to ensure that you do not get screwed. So, what happened here in the Maagdenhuis is that increasingly the offices here were being filled by people who used to work for the financial services industry, were the sort of real estate developing nomads who moved from a museum project to a school project, to a university project, to a hospital project, and are basically paid way beyond the normal salary scales of the staff of the University of Amsterdam. And of course, in order to be able to make clear to bankers outside of the University of Amsterdam that they actually are able to carry the financial obligations linked to both debts and credit derivative swaps, you have to make the overall organization completely financially transparent. And we all know what that has entailed. We're all being transformed over the last 10 to 15 years into so-called business units, and between these business units all sorts of financial flows take place in order to allow the office building, the main holding building here, the Maagdenhuis, to make clear to outside bankers that they are able to fulfill the solvency requirements as well as the liquidity requirements which belong to the overall debts that the University of Amsterdam has taken out. So, in my perspective, and that's sort of clearly spelled out in the paper, the managerialism of the university, the increasing transformation of this Institute of Higher Education and Learning, especially learning, into a widget factory, because that's basically what it has become, has everything to do with the need for the board of directors of this university to look at their own organization through the lens of a banker. It's basically seeing like a banker. And who of you know that this is a play on a title by a famous book by the anthropologist James Scott, Seeing Like a State. This is what we've experienced in the University of Amsterdam, is the effects of seeing like a banker. So what is wrong with the University of Amsterdam is that it's basically being forced, because it's a tragic tale. It's not a tale about people who have wanted to do bad things with this Institute of Higher Learning. No, it's a tragic tale. The board of directors of the University of Amsterdam is required to fulfill this particular butchering job of this particular university. And it has everything to do with the Trojan horse of the gift of real estate from the state to the university, secondary schools, hospitals, building societies, and what have you. So what is wrong with the University of Amsterdam is the same as what is wrong with universities across the Netherlands. And is basically the same as what is wrong with all our semi-public organizations. They have become factories. They have done mergers and acquisitions. They have become large. They have become financially dominated. And we, students, as well as staff, are the victims of that financial domination. And that is why, as a member of the staff of this university, I'm so very glad that the students ultimately decided that enough is enough. You were the trailblazers and have basically woken up the sleeping sheep that the staff used to be before you occupied the Burgerhuis. Okay. Second part, what's wrong with financialization? And now we sort of move out of this university building and try to look at what has happened since, let's say, the late 70s, early 80s with contemporary capitalism. And I'm not going to go into any details with regard to this sort of long transformation of capitalism since the late 70s. But one thing that sort of immediately strikes the eye when you look through your eyelashes at what has happened in contemporary capitalism is, again, the increasing importance of the financial sector. In 1980, the capital flows that moved in and out of the Netherlands were just as large as the flows of goods and services that moved out of the Netherlands and into the Netherlands. In 2007, a year before the outbreak of the crisis, the relationship was 1 to 25. Financial flows were 25 times as large as goods and services flows inside and out of the Netherlands. This is, in a nutshell, a clear indicator of a huge transformation in contemporary capitalism. We basically have been confronted with a waterhat in all sorts of financial products. And those financial products have allowed public organizations like the University of Amsterdam, states, for instance in Greece, but also households, in particular in the Netherlands, to bury themselves under extensive mountains of debt. And of course that automatically means and implies debt bondage. As long as you're able to pay off the interest as well as the principal of the loan that you've taken out, there's no problem. But oh man, once there is any sort of problem with regard to your own financial situation due to unemployment, sickness, divorce or whatever, you basically have to pay off everything until you reach the ports of the hell, the gates of hell. And basically that is also happening again here at the University of Amsterdam. It has buried itself tremendously under huge piles of debt, which basically means that its maneuvering space has shrunken hugely. Whenever there is, as for instance is the case currently with the Faculty of Humanities, a sudden decrease in the number of students who start to study at the Faculty of Humanities, you immediately have to kick out all sorts of staff because you don't have the reserves which allow you to basically plaster over these 2, 1, 3 years in which you suddenly are being confronted with less students. This organization, like so many organizations, like so many states, and like so many households, have basically lost all financial slack. And any rupture, it doesn't matter what it is, then results that you basically have the potential to go bankrupt, to become insolvent. I had a look at the budgetary plan for 2015 of the University of Amsterdam, and boy oh boy, what I saw wasn't nice. It clearly indicates that the real estate projects that are being undertaken by the University of Amsterdam have basically have surpassed the financial possibilities of the university. All the reserves for real estate development have gone. And it basically means that faculty is going to be confronted with an earlier requirement to pay the full cost of their new real estate in order to help the holding of the university out of their current financial predicament. So you can easily expect that also the other faculties, not only humanities, but also the social sciences, as well as the natural sciences, are going to be confronted very soon with all sorts of cutbacks in staff and in other sort of facilities. And this is basically something that is very closely linked to what Karl Polanyi, the Great Transformation, described in relationship to the enclosure movement. Basically, that was the commons in England, which were used by commoners in order to grow a cow, get some vegetables, grow some vegetables in order to be able to feed themselves. The enclosure movement meant that the commons were being privatized in order to allow rich wool traders to let sheep grow and graze on those commons. And the statement that was made, the political statement that was made in that period was basically, sheep eat man. We have a situation in which real estate basically kicks out students and staff. Financialization, ladies and gentlemen, is a pest. And we've actually seen in 2008 what kind of volatilities and what kind of shocks the financial system is prone to. And we all know that in the London city at the moment, bankers are again rewarding themselves with the similar kinds of bonuses that they got before the outbreak of the crisis. Whereas we, and especially of course in some southern parts of the Eurozone, we are still paying off the debts that the state had to take on its own balance sheet because it had to save the banks. Financialization sucks. We need to get rid of financialization. And again, returning to the Maagdenhuis through the entrance, I'm very happy with the fact that the Maagdenhuis is occupied and that part of the statements being made by you students is about the fact that this is all about financialization. I put a tweet up on Twitter today in which I basically stated, suddenly, due to the occupation of the Maagdenhuis, everyone knows what financialization is. And I added a joke, this is what you might call valorization of academic research. But financialization sucks and we need to get rid of financialization. And I don't care where we start. If we leave it to the banks and if we leave it to the politicians, we will actually be experiencing an unacceptable return to business as usual. Look at the statements being made by the head of the employer organization in the Netherlands. We should again transform the Dutch financial services into a growth sector. No, sir, thank you. We've seen what that has brought us. And there are many others who are basically making that claim. Financialization sucks. We need to get rid of financialization. And the best way to get rid of financialization is to force upon the board of directors of the University of Amsterdam that they're not going to pursue the further development of the humanities faculty at the Maagdenhuis Poort. Stop this madness now! Okay. Final part. What's wrong with our political system? This is not going to be a happy tale, and it's not merely my tale. I derive this tale from reading newspapers, seeing what is happening in the Eurozone, seeing what is happening in the Netherlands, reading books like Wolfgang Streeck's Gekaufte Zeit, Buying Time, which is due to be translated in Dutch and is going to be presented the 2nd of April. It is also based on work done by Peter Mayer, the deceased political scientist from Leiden. And it's basically that we've been confronted with what could be called a hollowing out of democracy. Colin Crouch, another author who has written about this, calls it post-democracy. And the best sort of a symbol in order to understand what post-democracy is that it's as if an N-bomb, a neutron bomb, has been dropped on our political institutions. Everything is still standing. Parties are still going through the motions. We still have all sorts of reporters and news programs which talk about politics as if politics matters. But actually, the power has already moved to other locations. And one of the locations where it actually has moved to is, of course, Brussels. And what is the striking thing about Brussels is that it's very similar to Washington. It's a big political campus where politics is completely, and I mean really completely, dominated by corporate interests. There's some who try to counter that, and they have a big fight to fight, and it's a fight worth supporting. But it's also a fight which is sort of marginal. It's like David and Goliath. Because we have something like 15,000 civil servants in Brussels walking around trying to aid the production of all sorts of laws and legislation. But up against 15,000 civil servants are 15,000 to 30,000 lobbyists working for the large publicly quoted multinational corporations. That's one part of the story. So basically, political decision-making is no longer taking place in The Hague, is no longer sort of the prerogative of chosen representatives of the people, but is increasingly based on a logic of $1, one vote. Not one man, woman, one vote. $1, one vote. 90% of legislative activities pursued in the Netherlands comes out of Brussels, and it's always pre-cooked by corporate interests. So that's one. Second is that political parties, not only in the Netherlands but basically throughout Europe and the United States, have become machines for the selection of a political elite. And I very much have the impression that those selection machines do not result in bringing above people who have a strong feel for what could be called public or common interests. They all talk the same language, and it's a corporate language. The VVD just indicated that the first chamber in the Netherlands is like the board of supervisors of the Netherlands Limited Liability Corporation. So it's completely pervaded by a corporate language, which of course you also find here at the University of Amsterdam. They don't have any members anymore. The media, I don't want to talk about the media because basically I hate what journalists are doing. Any form of criticism, a viable democracy requires countervailing powers. Countervailing powers which should come originally from a critical press, trying to speak truth to power. But they don't anymore do that. It's one big entertainment show in which it's all about short-term tactics between politicians without any sort of larger strategic view. It's even worse. We have a prime minister who prides himself for not having any view whatsoever. So that's part of the story. And of course, the countervailing power of critical academia has also completely disappeared. I already talked about my colleagues, who basically, my colleagues at the Faculty of the Social Sciences, who see this all as sort of a lot of hubbub over legitimated cutbacks on the budget of the humanities. Well, they made a mess of it, so they should clean it up. That's basically the overall tone of voice. And at the end of the day, I indicated that also in the short speech that I gave in the Maagdenhuis, we're all sort of victim of this neoliberal experiment in social Darwinism, in which it's not about us, it's not about this university, it's not about a larger public good, it's all about our individual, narrow-minded futures. Can I get this grant? Will I be able to get on this particular board? Do I get my papers published? Etc., etc., which sort of stands against any possibility of collective organization. And again, that is why I'm so very happy with what is happening here, because finally it seems to have woken up my colleagues also in the social sciences faculties. So academia is no longer any sort of countervailing power either. They don't talk truth to power. They do all sorts of highly esoteric, scientific, methodologically responsible research, which then gets buried in an international journal, which is only quoted by 20 other nerds who basically do the same kind of stuff. So we don't have any countervailing power. And then finally, we're all sort of victim of this sort of naturalization of neoliberal language. We all think it's sort of normal that bankers earn more than cleaners and security guards. We all think that it's normal that once you buy a house, you take out a debt. We think it's normal, or we used to think it's normal, that multinational corporations try to avoid paying taxes. Basically, a lot of us have accepted the narrative in which taxation is seen as a market distortion instead of a source of funding for doing collective things. So the frame, which more broadly is basically continuously being reproduced in wider society, among the people as well as among the elite, is a narrative, is a frame, is a discourse which is sort of disallowing any form of politicization. I wrote a critical book about the banking sector. I got burned over the fact that I included a list in that book. The book as such has not been reviewed at all in Dutch newspapers. They avoid it as if it is some sort of a toxic text. But at the end of the day, I find it quite striking that reporters, as well as other academics, are not taking up the invitation to criticize the elites. And this is sort of the final part of the speech that I intended to do. We have a rotten elite. We need to get rid of this elite. I don't know whether we actually can do without an elite. There's some social scientific theories which suggest that elites are inevitable. One of them was Robert Michels, who claimed that there was this iron law of oligarchy, even in organizations which should be bottom-up organized. So I don't know whether we can do without an elite. But what I do know is that we can severely miss this particular elite. I watched The Occupation on Thursday, and I was sort of struck by the shell shock in the eyes of the board of directors of the University of Amsterdam. It reminded me, and forgive me that I make this comparison, it reminded me with the look in the faces of the politicians of purple in 2002, March or April 2002, after the municipal elections, when the big winner of that election was Pim Fortuyn, who was seated in front of the representatives of the purple elections, and they didn't know how to respond. I see what is happening here as, and I don't know whether you like it, I don't know whether you're going to subscribe to this, as a form of progressive populism. And we are desperately in need of progressive populism. Your cause, students and staff, is not only the cause of this Institute of Higher Education, which has always been and still is an elite institution. Your cause is also the cause of the security guards here in front of the entrance. It's also the cause of the care workers in all sorts of care institutions. It's basically a population in the Netherlands, in Germany, in France, in the United Kingdom, in Spain, in Greece, in France, who have been screwed by an elite who has delivered all sorts of promises, neoliberal promises. I promise you the mountains in terms of consumption goods. But at the end of the day, we have seen flat wage developments in the Netherlands, flat wage developments throughout the Eurozone. And the only ones who have gained from market liberalization, from financialization, from the managerialization of our public institutes have been the large corporations and our current elites. The disconnect of this elite with the population, with staff and students, was clearly visible Thursday evening when the board of directors entered this building and stated, "Get out of here, this is my building." These people, as I indicated, don't know what students and staff look like. When they want to visit their own staff, it's called a field trip. As if they're visiting the colonies, and we have to prepare months before they actually enter our building and set up all sorts of nice shows, 1-minute speeches about what your research is about. So I got 1 minute last time to talk about financialization. That big hit it was. We make all sorts of videos and other kind of fancy stuff in order to give them a feel of what we're doing. The disconnect between these people who drive around in cars with drivers, who go from reception to reception, who only talk with other members of the elite, who continuously reproduce this discursive ideological bubble. These people need to be kicked out. I don't know how to do it. The only thing I can advise you to do is don't let yourself be co-opted, as the occupiers were in 1969 or 68, 1969. They were co-opted. The dominant response of the Dutch elite historically has always been to co-opt their critics. So what they say, they pick out the organizers of these particular occupiers and they promise them all sorts of career perspectives, either implicitly or explicitly, and they take over some of the jargon that you have minted in order to voice your criticisms, but slowly, ever so slowly, it gradually gets transformed into what is a sort of mainstream narrative. Don't let yourself be co-opted. And with regard to the tactics, this is the strategy. Don't let yourself be co-opted. Call for further democratization. Make it actually radical democratization. Call for the stop of the further financialization of the University of Amsterdam. Call for absolute transparency with regard to the financial state of the University of Amsterdam. Because they're obfuscating. They're always obfuscating. So call for absolute transparency. Hire in experts who can basically, for one way or the other, guarantee that you actually have actual transparency. So these are the strategic goals. With regard to the tactical goals, I have to say that I'm sort of flabbergasted with the creativity of you people. You have been so smart. I would never have expected you to be so smart. You've been so smart politically, because basically the board of directors of the University of Amsterdam has already lost the fight. They've lost the hearts and minds of the rest of the Netherlands. It's amazing that you've actually succeeded in doing that, and it's becoming increasingly a wider movement. Not only this university, first of all, not only the humanities, not only the University of Amsterdam, not only universities, not only semi-public institutes in the Netherlands, but basically it's a big fight for democracy, and it's a big fight against the hegemony of financialization and financialized metrics. Keep up the good work.